It runs about $30 million.
If you take
And plus about 15 million a year in development. That the operating and capital budget in Section 8 is about 30 million. Then any particular year we have about $15 million in development going on.
what is development?
That would be Ashley Station, Arbor Point, that kind of work. Well, first of all, it's good to know none of it's funded locally. So we get no local funding from the city government. Our real connection with the city government is the mayor appoints our board. Now, occasionally when we do redevelopment, we will go and see if we can get a contribution from the city council, but they give us no operating funds.
Whether it be land or something like
Right.
that.
But no operations money. So we get that mostly from HUD in the form of operating subsidy and some capital funding that helps us do our modernization work. And then we have rent revenues as well. And then some miscellaneous investment income, that sort of thing. The misconception is that public housing people don't work and they're all on welfare. The facts are, in Columbus, only 4% of our residents get their primary source of income as TANF or welfare.
4%?
4%. And
You can win some bar bets with that.
Oh, I do. If I go to a Rotary meeting or some meeting and talk and ask that question, I get some people say as high as 75%, but only 4%. What we have is, the majority of our residents are either elderly or disabled. And then we have about 28% that are working, and then a small slice other, and a small slice of welfare is the primary. We all tend to say that they have, just like we tend to talk about schools in the same way, and the student population's changed, and breakdown of the family and that sort of thing. And there may be some of that. But I think that what people really don't understand is that, poor people are just like the rest of us. They're just poor, basically. And almost, I would
That
say,
may be the best quote I've ever gotten in one of these.
I would say 90% of our residents are really good people. And they have had unfortunate circumstances. Many of them, like I said, are elderly or disabled. We have a lot of disabled residents. And so I think before we judge folks where they live, we ought to think about, well, you really don't know much about them. You don't know where they came from. You don't know what their background is. You don't know what kind of abuse they may have suffered in the past. So before you sit there and say, well, they ought to all be working, or they ought to all be doing this, you really ought to think, well, maybe you just don't understand everything you need to understand about it.
How much longer will BTW be standing as it is today?
I would say not more than, probably no more than 2 years, for sure.
Are you already vacating units?
We are. We are, as residents are moving out, we are vacating units, particularly on the north end, where we're going to do the replacement housing. So where we are is, we were funded for the first replacement site, which will be in the old Chapman Homes site.
Where's
so we're
that?
Gonna have, that's down from Baker Village.
Okay.
Okay, that's down off of, is it Benning Drive or Benning Road, whichever one is further south there. So we're going to put a nice three-story senior facility there, and it'll be unlike anything else we've done. And I think it'll be really well received.
So there will be less public housing density on the BTW side?
Yes. So what we'll do is we'll ultimately tear down the 392 units there. Replace them with 100 units there on the Chapman site, and then about 100 units on the north side of the existing. And then on the southern site, near the Civic Center, that will be kept for another use, commercial or some other use. We identified 3 classes of properties. Those that were obsolete and had to be gotten rid of. And in those were Peabody, BTW, and Baker Village was in that class.
So BTW is the last of the.
And that's the last of the ones. And we took a worst first approach. The worst one we wanted to get rid of first, then the next one, and then the next one. In fact, some of the consultants that worked on Peabody really wanted to go to BTW instead of Peabody for the whole 6.
How was Peabody worse than BTW?
Oh, it was, for one thing, if you remember, the property was more insulated.
Yeah.
It was looked inward on itself, whereas BTW, not as much. So it was like you were just trapped in there, okay? And it was very highly dense. It had deteriorated. It was in worse condition, physically as well. So we knew that was the one we had. There is. We have about 1,000 people on the waiting list for Section 8 and about 2,300 on public housing. But if we opened the Section 8 waiting list for 2 or 3 weeks, we'd have 3,000 or 4,000 people on the waiting list.
And there's 2,800 units of Section 8? Is that
Yeah,
what?
about 2,300.
Oh, 2,300. So your waiting list is almost half as much as your capacity. Wow.
And it would be as much as our capacity. Just think, public housing we actually only have 1,700 public housing units in Columbus. We got 2,300 people on the waiting list. Well, a criminal background would definitely do it.
So
we screen all our residents for
no criminal history at all?
Well, it's possible. It depends on what it is. If it's recent, or if it's a violent crime, or drug, you're probably not going to get in. If it's a sexual predator, you can't get in. Also, we look at your credit history as well. So you may not get in. It doesn't look like you'll pay your rent.
Where do the people go that can't get into public housing?
Well, if you were to find the worst housing in the community, you would find many people there that's why they're there. They can't get into public housing or Section 8. And then they're at the mercy of what they can get. We see a need for some workforce housing. Not housing that just concentrates on the worst of the poor, but that strata between 60 and 80% income, that are all working families. And that
Is that the working poor?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we think we need some housing. We would like to have some housing for that group. And that also lets us, the subsidies needed for that housing would be less than traditional public housing. So that also lets us stretch that money and serve more families or serve it more effectively. So I'm hoping to do that. I would like to see us look at some housing for kids that are aging out of foster care. That is a need that does not seem to be served. We haven't talked about the homeless activity, but we're well underway. I think it's realistic that we can reduce our chronic homeless population by 70 to 80% over the next few years. And we have the resources that have been put into place. And I told my colleagues, shame on us if we don't do that. We have an opportunity that'll only come again in another generation probably. No, definitely not. Planning and development.
How's that different from being a community organizer?
Well, a community organizer would go out and organize people in the community.
Okay.
Planning and development is you're planning what you're going to do in the community for the use of block grant money or other community funds. That's definitely a different role. Probably depends on who you ask. Well, I think essentially I want all my employees to do well. And there's nothing good to be gained that anybody, I want every employee to do well. And we work.
So that's the base.
That's the base. I want everybody to be successful here. Essentially, leadership in management is really simple. You want to help good people do good work, and bad people do bad work elsewhere. That's the essence of it. And so my job is to provide people what they need to do their job and encourage them to do their job. They're committed to the mission. They do a really good job. They work hard. You know, and I'm really proud of them. I'm probably more proud of that than anything else that's happened here. It's the way they have handled a lot of change. We've just had one change after another. You know, we've demolished 1,250 units, and you have no idea what that does to your budget when you demolish that kind of, what that does.
Budget takes a hit as well?
Yeah, it takes a huge hit.
How so?
Well, because you lose most of your revenue. You lose all that revenue, because when you do these redevelopments, at least for the first few years, you have to outsource that development and management because it's tied in with the tax credits. And it takes years for the housing authority to get in place to do that management. We're just now beginning to get to that. So for that first 10 years, you lose all that revenue. So
Wow.
you have to downsize and you have to plan that. That's really the hardest part, is you have to plan that out years ahead of time. Otherwise, you end up with a big layoff. And I think we've really been, I think if we've done anything right, I think that's the best thing we've done, is the way we've dealt with the employees. And they've responded beautifully. Well, that's an interesting, I am shocked that you'd ask that question, you know.
I'll wait until the end of the interview.
Yeah, it's okay. You know, it was an interesting thing. And I will say, you know, that was not an anti-housing authority issue. It was where, not what. And folks that were not in favor of it did not, and made it clear to us that we don't want you to not do what you need to do. We want BTW replaced. And we just don't want the first phase here. And we really, my only disappointment is two disappointments. One is I think it would have been good for the Liberty area. I think it would have been a good thing to get some redevelopment there, some economic activity, okay? There were those that didn't see it that way. And so I think it's a missed opportunity for the community. But having said that, my only other disappointment is I just wish we had known the year before when we started talking about it. We'd have been glad to go somewhere else. We just hated that it got so far along the process before anybody raised any objection.
Was that a misstep on your part, on Mayor Tomlinson's part?
No, Mayor Tomlinson was just barely in office, I think, when we first started talking about that. No, I mean, we talked with them, we showed them, we told them what we were gonna do, where we were gonna do it, and nobody said anything about it. And so we just marched on down that road. And then,
Right into an ambush.
yeah, so, you know, if they'd just told us, that'd have been fine. We would have just found another site. I mean, it was a very expensive site for us to work in because there were lots of environmental conditions here. So we were spending far more money of our own money there than we had spent at either Baker Village or Peabody replacement. So it really cost us less money to move to the Chapman site. And it cost the city less money, in fact, in their contribution. So I couldn't ask for better support from the city. They've been enormously supportive of the city council. Yeah, when we go ask for money, they ask tough questions. Well, they're looking out for the public's dollars. They ought to ask tough questions. You know, I expect to be asked real. They want to know what they're spending their money for. That's what they're supposed to do. They've been enormously supportive. They've supported everything we've tried to do. And I think that doesn't happen in most communities. It just doesn't.
Is it a culture here?
Yeah, for sure. I always believe that if you have the right culture, you're going to get good board members. And I suspect you get good board members on every board. If you have the wrong culture, you're going to get bad board members. And I think that's one thing that's made me enjoy it so much here is you know, if you know the difference, it's more fun. If you know the difference between a bad board and a good board, when you get a good board, it's priceless. It really is.